How do you build a high-performing culture? This is Culture Architects. Candid conversations with extraordinary leaders sharing their biggest successes, failures, and lessons learned on their culture journeys. Here's David J. Friedman.
So we have a very special guest on our podcast today, and our guest is Lloyd Ficket. And I say special because Lloyd and I go back probably, Lloyd, pushing 30 years, 25 to 30 years ago that I first met Lloyd. And Lloyd is a communication consultant who created a program that you'll learn about today called the Collaborative Way. And it's something that I learned in my first company, and I and a brother of mine, Larry, and one of our managers, her name was Joanne at the time, we spent almost a full day for close to 2 years with Lloyd and a number of other companies learning this material. And this material became foundational to the work that I created later that we now know as the fundamentals. And so it was a foundation of our fundamentals work that have been taught to so many people. And so Lloyd has had a significant influence on my own career, on my own thinking, on my own learning. And so it is a particular treat to be able to have Lloyd on the podcast, joining us today to learn more about his history, his background, and in particular, the collaborative way. So Lloyd, thank you so much for joining us on the Culture Architects podcast.
Yes, well, David, thanks for inviting me, and it's a delight to get to spend this time together, and I greatly appreciate where you've taken this body of work, the foundations of what you're doing and the foundations of what the Collaborative Way is about are totally aligned with each other. So
they are very linked.
I really appreciate the work you're doing to spread that called out designed way of working out into the world. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. So for our audience sake, let's just get a little bit of background, a little bit of history. So as I said, and for our audience sake, Lloyd is a communication consultant and has created a particular program called the Collaborative Way. But let's go back, Lloyd, and I don't even know this history. Like, where did the Collaborative Way come from? Like, how did you get into doing communication consultants first? Let's just start there. So somewhere in your career, you decided communication was a really important thing and you could help people about that. Where did that come from?
Well, I don't really relate to it as so much communication, though it is, okay? I relate to it more like how we relate with one another and how we work with one another, and then laying down a foundation for how we relate and work with one another. That's what I've been interested in longer than I actually realized I was interested in it. The Collaborative Way itself was emerged out of a necessity to develop an extraordinary way of working together. It started at a company called Rodell, and they were the world leaders in providing the consumables used to polish silicon wafers, make computer chips. And that was way back like in 1989 when I started working with them, when there was this breakthrough in making computer chips called planarization. And that's where you could now, instead of originally you'd polish a silicon wafer, print on it, and that was a computer chip. But the breakthrough is when you could polish, print, polish, print, polish, print. So you had planes of printed circuits on one computer chip. So that was one of the fundamental breakthroughs that lets us have this conversation in the way we're having it today. And the founders of Rodell were visionary enough to recognize that their market was about to explode, and because of this breakthrough. And they said, how do we continue to be the world leaders when that happens? Because when that happens, the big guys are coming in, the 3Ms, Cabot's, etc. And they came to the conclusion that the only way they could possibly continue to be world leaders is if they came up with an extraordinary way of working together. And so I had done some work with them, helping merge their two companies back together. And in the process of their two companies were two separate warring executive teams. And so that had been so successful, and they had joined together as one really extraordinary team, executive team. And they approached me and said, this is what their challenge was, as to how do we become develop this extraordinary way of working, and asked me if I'd join them in developing that. And I said, sure, that's a dream journey. And I started like most consultants would, working to develop individual leadership, individual commitment, individual communication skills, changing behavior, deepening commitment, things like that. And we were making progress. But when I honestly looked at it, I said, if the vision that they're seeing is going to happen, we're not going fast enough. This is not going to meet that challenge. And being up against that question and provided the opening for me to have this breakthrough where I saw the key was to shift the focus from developing the individual to developing how we are going to work together. Okay. It was actually hidden inside of what they were asked in the first place, and I just couldn't hear it initially. It's like if we could learn to listen generously to one another, not just that I learn to listen generously, that we take on developing this practice and learning to listen together generously, what could we accomplish? And then once I got that it had to be a we, then the next question, what would those practices be? What were they? Yeah, it was clear to me, at least for what we were up to, that it needed to be a small set of practices that we could take on, really getting good at. And it just, I guess, from all the history of the extraordinary teams I'd been on and developed and done, it just was so obvious. We needed to listen to each other, listen generously, speak straight to each other. We needed to take on really, truly being for each other, honoring our commitments, and each of us be a source of acknowledgement and appreciation across the organization, up, down, sideways, etc. All focused towards accomplishing what we are up to together. And that we take that on in a context or framework of learning. So we're going to always be learning this way. We are practicing. So this is a practice that's forever going to, when you get in trouble is when you think you got it.
Yes. I say all the time, having practiced fundamentals, as we call them, for 20-some years, I still every day see a new nuance, a new way of thinking about it, a new way of looking at something that somebody shares. We're never done with that. So I'm curious. So you codified it into these 5 practices, all organized around what we're up to, what we're trying to accomplish, and in the context of learning. Yeah. Have you ever, over the years, thought to yourself, maybe there's a 6th one, or maybe this needs to be different, but you know what, we stuck with it because that's what I did? Or do you, after all these years of working at it, think, nope, those were the 5 and I wouldn't change a thing? If you were doing it over, how would you think about that?
And it's sufficient. It gets it pulls everything else. I found it to be sufficient. It's not that a company won't also have some other things, but this is like the foundation. Then, say they might have another guidance inside of what I would call inside of up to. So better, faster, safe, for example. One of the companies we know, that's their thing. Better, faster, safe. Okay. So they're going to do better than anybody. They're going to do it faster than anybody else. And they're going to do it safe. So this is what they're up to. Then they bring their practice of the collaborative way to accomplish that. Okay. It can be inclusionary. And then of whatever other systems of collaboration you want, or other called out, say we will sometimes join with the CEO and the company to develop what we call leadership intensive. And that's where we're going to bring what are the fundamentals of that, the leadership of this company. How do we lead, And so each company is different what those are. And those things might be something like balance, or or it could be influence, or it could be something to do with continuous improvement, or things like that. So then we'll take that and then we'll use the collaborative way to accomplish those, but also bring their unique flavor and what it is that defines this company in its unique personality, unique thrust into the world. So it has a space for. It's another way of talking about it. The collaborative way is a way to bring your values into action, into life.
Yeah.
Okay,
it's much how we talk about fundamentals in a very similar way. It's a way of bringing values into daily actions. So what does it look like to live those values every single day?
Yes, right.
And for our audience's sake, just to give you some context around this. So when I met Lloyd 25 years ago or so, and was introduced to what Lloyd is describing as the collaborative way, the series of practices that he codified, developed, and taught, we learned that in my first company, which is called RSI. And we learned that from Lloyd, and we worked with Lloyd and others for a couple of years learning it before we eventually rolled it out into our organization. Once we rolled it out, all of our employees went through 16 hours of training. So every single employee went through 16 hours of training on this material so that it just became our language. It became embedded in us. When I eventually discovered or developed the whole concept of creating fundamentals, which was a broader set of behaviors that we practice and that I've been teaching for the last 20 years or so, when I created the first set of fundamentals that ever existed, which was in RSI, 5 of those fundamentals were the 5 collaborative way practices. So I actually divided the fundamentals into 4 different categories of things. These days, we don't divide them at all, but then that original set, I divided them to 4 categories. One of those 4 categories was the collaborative way in these 5 practices. Those 5 practices that Lloyd described became fundamentals. And so in virtually all of our clients, those practices are among the fundamentals that people practice. So we think of the set of fundamentals as how we live to the values every day. And among those fundamentals are the collaborative way practices. But all of that came from the work that Lloyd did originally and has focused with other people. So it is really the foundation of an important foundation of the fundamentals. And one of the things, Lloyd, I remember, I said this before we started this podcast, that Lloyd and I, because we go back so many years, there are many things I learned from Lloyd that I still think in the back of my mind. I remember when Lloyd said this, so I remember when Lloyd said that, or Lloyd used to say, because he was an important mentor to me. And one of the things that I remember you saying early on, Lloyd, is that you talked about the collaborative way, as you called it, at least as I remember it, you called it an invented way of relating. And I thought that was a really interesting way of framing that. So talk a little bit more about when you say it's an invented way of relating. What do you mean when you say that? If you even remember.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes, I don't actually remember saying that, but I
maybe I made it up. No, but I think you did.
But I do appreciate the spirit of that. Okay,
yes.
And that spirit is still what I might say a generative way of relating. It's that you get a certain way of relating in any given situation for free. There's just an immediate automatic way you relate in even any given situation. And most of that is generated from, your past and or from your culture or from your upbringing, from different things that have happened. And many times that'll be sufficient to carry the day, but then lots of times it really isn't sufficient. And so what is it by generative or I forget, invented?
Invented.
You know, I have a chance. There is also an opportunity to choose a way of relating. So that's probably what I would more say today. Yes, there's a one you get automatically, and a lot of time it has some reactivity in it. Okay. And then if you recognize that, there's an opportunity to choose a more forwarding way to engage, one that is going to have curiosity and openingness, a willingness to really reach over and hear what's going on, a question your I knows, and so the collaborative way is an opportunity. Like each of those are practices. The door opens to them when you recognize you're not practicing. So if you're not listening, if you can notice that you're not listening generously, that's the doorway to listen generously. You know, if you can notice you're not really speaking so straight at this moment, you're kind of hedging and you're a little, or there's something you're not saying. If you can notice that, that's the opening to choose a way of relating consistent with what the commitments are that you're practicing.
There's a way that I sometimes describe that choice that we're making. And this may have been something that you said years ago, or maybe I just made it up. But I think it resonates with people. And the way that I sometimes describe it is, I think if we came to work and we all came from different countries and spoke different languages, and I came in and I grew up in a family where we spoke German, and I speak German when I come in, and you spoke, you come from a family where you spoke Chinese, and you speak Chinese when you come in, and somebody else is speaking Spanish or Swahili or whatever else, it'd be really hard for us to work very well together. But if we all decided it doesn't really matter where you came from, when we come into this company, the language we speak is, Swiss, then okay, that's the language we speak here. And it doesn't really matter where you came from. It'd be a lot easier for us to work well together. And I think of it kind of that way when we adopt a language, whether it's the language of the fundamentals or the language specifically of the collaborative way. We're choosing, to use your word choosing, choosing that to let go of our previous history, biases, defaults, filters, as you will call them, and let go of those. And when we come in here, we're saying this is the way we're going to relate to each other. And by choosing that path and us all choosing the same path, and I think importantly, this is something that I've thought a lot about over the years that I don't think I thought about 20 years ago, the importance of the language, that having a common language to be able to say, listen generously, and we all know what it means to listen generously. Or, I need to speak straight right now, and everybody knows what that means. So to adopt a common language that we're choosing to say, this is how we're going to be at work, I think has just tremendous power and helps to break down some of the dysfunction that comes from, to your point, we all have this automatic way that the default way from our history, our family, our background, our previous experiences. So the choosing of a way to be, I think, is really powerful.
Yes, the choosing and the learning, and to start to wake up that, like, until you call out, like you're talking about with the fundamentals or with the collaborative way, what your tendency is going to be is you have a set of expectations that you don't even know, but they were there. And and when people behave inconsistent with those expectations, you got a problem. and you don't even, but it doesn't even occur as like, this is my model, or this, there are other models. It's just that whatever the other person's doing is wrong. So, okay. So by calling out a set of a way we're going to work, and that we're going to learn to work together, now we have this opportunity to have something other than those expectations, and it opens the doorway for us to actually really get good at working together, because we have a common called out way we're working together. We could get really good at this. And like you said, with the same language, with some mutual understanding, and we're growing. and developing that mutual understanding through our practice together, which is what the fundamentals is offering and what the collaborative way offers. And, I think that's just, we're both operating from, my view, the fundamental breakthrough out of which the collaborative way was born, is recognizing what you're pointing to right now, that if we can call out how we're going to work together, then we can really get good at that. And that pushes us, when we put the focus on how we work together, that also pushes us to grow personally to meet that challenge, okay? But it's a different focus from it being all on me growing. I have seen so many times where people have developed a lot of skills, but it doesn't translate to how we're working together. And then when you bring like the fundamentals of the collaborative way forward, all that learning gets to now come forward into how we work together, and that wasn't being accessible before.
That's an interesting perspective, and I think about our executive chair Dustin Campbell talks a lot about, as he's come to appreciate fundamentals and the role that culture plays in all of this, that he makes a similar distinction that you're drawing of so many programs that do, I'll call them leadership development, like you're describing, are about me developing my skills, but they're not about how we work together. They're just about me developing my skills. And culture at its core, at least as I see it and as what we try to do, culture at its core is about how we work together. It's how do things happen in this company. It's not, yes, skill development is a piece of that, but it's not principally about how each of us individually get more skillful. It's about how we work together. And it's a subtle, but I think really important distinction.
That is accurate in my mind as well, as I see it. It's subtle and extremely powerful. It's that switch to this called out way of working together that we're learning, which requires me to learn, which requires my
skill development's a part of that.
Is a part of it, but it's towards something. It's towards not just me knowing how, and it gets less locked up into I knows and more into how's it working out here? Are we actually getting this to happen out here in our interactions together, in that we space between the two of us or the bunch of us, and so it puts the focus where it needs to be to have an extraordinary way of working together.
I was working with or having a conversation, more accurately, with a CEO recently, and this was a young guy, and he'd grown a very successful company. He's had maybe 150, 200 employees now. And he was describing to me, some of his frustrations with how his people weren't being the way he wanted them to be. And he was describing to me several examples of where he gave people coaching. Something happened, and he described to them, how they should handle it. And he was proud of the coaching he gave them, and it was reasonably good coaching, from my perspective at least.
Yeah.
But what I realized as I listened to him, one of the things he was missing is that he had no name for what he was coaching. Like, he couldn't say, well, this is speaking straight, or this is listening generously, or some of our fundamentals, this is what we call practicing blameless problem solving, or getting clear on expectations. He was just doing a one-off coaching with somebody and giving them good advice, but there's no way for that to spread in the organization if there isn't a name for it. If they couldn't say, this is what that principle is called, and this is how we practice it, it was just a one-off coaching thing. And I never really thought about exactly that way before until I had this conversation recently of the importance of being able to name something. That this is what we call this practice.
Yes, it's the naming of it, and it's the making it a practice. It's
not enough to name it, of course,
because it's so much like an expectation when it's coming in That's why when you have a way of working together, it's a foundation for coaching and development to stand on. because now we have a mutuality of what we're here and what we're learning how to do together. So that platform, that calling it out, that naming it, as you're saying, moves it into that mutuality, which is so important. Yes.
When we work with clients in developing their fundamentals, I mentioned that the core collaborative way practices are almost always embedded in the fundamentals. And most frequently, we use the language that you originally called out of listening generously and speaking straight, though there are sometimes companies want to use different language for essentially the same things. And one of the things that I have found is, like, let's use speak straight as an example, that sometimes people will say to me, I don't want to use that language because people don't know what that means. And I have often said to them, and I'm curious about your reaction of this, I've often said, sometimes it's actually better that if they don't know what that means, because we get to supply the definition of what speaking straight means. If they knew what it meant, they might have a different version of what we mean by speaking straight than what we really mean. So by calling it something that might be a little different from what people are familiar with, it provides us an opportunity to create our own definition of what that practice really looks like. I'm curious about your perspective on that.
I would concur. Like by calling it speaking straight, it gives rise to, what do you mean by that?
Yes.
And then inside of that, what do you mean by that? We can then work to generate a meaning that is actually forwarding. So like my short version of that would be to speak up, to speak honestly in a way that contributes to what we're up to together. That's what I would call speaking straight. So then, okay, so let's work at that, While the one little other caveat, taking responsibility for caring for the impact your speaking is having.
Yes.
Okay. So I might have had the greatest positive intent in my speaking straight. However, the impact over there, somebody just fell apart. That doesn't get, then whoops, that didn't actually contribute to what we were up to. I got a little work to do in terms of how to care for that so that I can possibly help the person in appreciating what I'm really trying to say. And they most likely heard something other than what I was intending to say. Or I discover, whoops, I did have a little burr up my saddle there. And
I let that get in the way a little bit.
I was a little not so straight there. So forwarding, So
something so here's another thing I remember you saying once, and maybe I'm misremembering, but the spirit of it I think is probably true. And I actually said this yesterday. We were rolling out a set of fundamentals actually at the Ohio National Guard.
Beautiful.
Practicing fundamentals among lots of soldiers. And I was saying to them that something that I at least think I remember you saying, but has always stayed in my mind, and the way that I say Lloyd said this was that I remember you saying that if you want to influence action, what counts is what's heard, not what you said. Did I quote you accurately, Lloyd?
You did. You got it right.
And I think that's a really powerful thought that so often you'll hear somebody say, well, I told them that. Well, okay, that's nice. Is that what they heard? Or did they hear something very different from that? And I think that's a really powerful way of thinking about what was the result of that exchange. Did that exchange actually forward what we're up to? Did somebody understand even what it is that I was trying to communicate with them?
Exactly. And when you appreciate the fact that we're all of us are always listening through some level of filters, and that it's a fair accomplishment to actually be heard as you intended. One might want to get curious about what the other person is hearing, if you're actually interested in influencing action, because that's what, like you pointed out, that I had said is what counts, is what they heard. That's going to be what influences their action, not what you said. So to wake up to that is a huge awakening. Yes.
Yeah. So talk about, in your work, Lloyd, you taught years ago and you mentioned it in this conversation here, this idea of filters. So describe for our audience, what is a filter and what do you mean by that?
Well, it's like, let's see. It's something that's influencing what we hear, okay? It's something that's shaping what we hear. So, and it could be everything. There's so many types of filters. Like if I'm annoyed, that's a filter. And then I listen to somebody speak to me and through that annoyance and whatever I hear them say, I actually take that to be what they said. But that is probably not exactly what they said, you know, because I can only hear it through my current annoyance, which is a filter, okay? Or I have a history with that person. So
I know what they're going to say. This is how they always are.
My mother calls on the phone. Yeah, Mom, you know, and I'm, or an employee that I've had, a colleague that I've had challenges with. Oh, Henry, oh boy. And then whatever I hear through that filter I have, that story I have about Henry, whatever gets through is what's going to also validate that filter. So, but I'll take it to be whatever I hear through that filter to be what Henry's saying. Yes. Or I could have a filter for our business and finance people, our accountants, our whatever, and an accountant again. Okay, what are you saying? You know, and then you have that filter for whatever your history with people who are in the financial part of the company, or the salespeople. Oh gosh, we're talking to a salesman now. You know, oh my God, what have they said? To our clients, you know, so I have filters for those. But I will take what I hear through my filter to be what the person is actually saying, not appreciating for the most part that it's colored by whatever that filter is. And when I can just even begin to wake up to and be responsible for the fact that I'm listening through filters and other people are listening through filters, it's just a part of what goes with being a human being. You know, that's how it goes. Rather than be in this kind of naive way of relating in which you think whatever you're hearing is what the other person is saying, and whatever you're saying is what the other person is hearing. That just isn't what's happening.
So it's really just a recognition. To your point, if we're human, we're going to have filters. There's not a way to not have them.
We're going to have it.
But if I can own up to and recognize the filters that I have and recognize that, to your point, what I'm hearing is not exactly what they're saying. It's just what's getting through my filter. And if I can at least own and use your word, be responsible for that, I can at least have a better chance of it having less influence over me, or at least maybe said another way, I could have more curiosity about what else might be going on and not think what I got was the truth or the full picture.
Exactly. And when I can, sometimes I can actually recognize I've got a filter for this person. Okay. And then I could actually set it aside a bit. And then bring a new level of curiosity instead of I know what they're saying. Here you go again. I know what you're saying, and you notice yourself doing that. You can come to notice yourself doing that, and then when you notice yourself doing that again, a choice arises. You could set that aside. It's probably got some truth in it. It's not like it doesn't have any truth in it. There's probably you built that out of something, okay?
Right.
But it's also coloring what you can hear. So if you can set it aside some, you can bring a new level of curiosity and really working to get over into the other person's perspective that is not allowed by that filter. And what would give them to say what they're saying? that's where it gets interesting. You know, to me, that's where real coaching begins, is when you get over into the other person's perspective as close as you can get, so that it makes sense to you. And your clue they're getting close is that it starts to make their behavior that before didn't make sense to you, that needs to be coached. You're now starting to see, oh, I see why they were doing that. I see what they're trying to accomplish.
I may not do it the same way, but I can understand if I were in their shoes, their behavior would make sense. Given
the way they're viewing the world.
Yes.
Okay. And then that gives me where I could, if I get close that way, then I can ask a question that might help them view the world in another way. And then their behavior is going to change much more easily than if I'm trying to get them to do something that doesn't fit in the way the world occurs for them. You know?
Yeah. So when we talk about the language and the language that you chose when you coined the phrases for the collaborative way practices, another one that I think is a really interesting one that always sort of like perks people's ears up is this word generously in the practice of listening generously. That's different than just being a good listener. And so talk a little bit about what we mean and what you mean by the generously aspect of that.
Well, at its simplest it's an expression. One, it's an expression of generosity just to give your attention to another person. And so, I mean, people are hungry for that. And then the next level is to listen for the value in what the other person is saying. There's almost always something of value there. Listen for the gold there. Listen, and if I can listen for that, that's an expression of generosity, to listen for the gold, especially where I wasn't initially hearing any. Okay, that is an act of generosity, and so it's working to get that, appreciate that spirit that's in, instead of just however I happen to be listening, and it's so often the way we just happen to be listening doesn't have a lot of generosity in it. It's more like, I'm right, you're wrong, now go ahead.
Yes.
That's not exactly real generous, you know. So
well, so here's another Lloydism that I remember. You can tell me once again if I've remembered accurately or not, but I have given you credit for this in any case. That I have said to many people that I remember you saying, and I've taken it to heart, that a particularly advanced form of listening generously is the ability to listen from the perspective that I'm genuinely open to shifting my point of view based upon the contribution of what you have to say. In other words, I may recognize my filters or biases, I might call them, going into this. And I may have some biases, and I don't mind articulating that I have some biases here, but I'm genuinely, truly open to the possibility that what you have to say could cause me to shift my point of view. And I think of that as like a really advanced form of really listening generously.
Yes. And I would say I think, like another way I language or would say what listening generously is to listen with curiosity and an intention to learn, backed up by a willingness to be influenced. And that's what you're talking about, that willingness to be influenced. And if there's no willingness to be influenced, you aren't listening generously.
Yes.
And so you're pointing to, I wouldn't call it so advanced. I'd call it to, you know,
the right way to do
that
it.
willingness,
Yes, right.
that's what puts you into it's not so much the right way as it is what puts you in the domain of listening generously, is that willingness without that willingness to be influenced, I can use all the listening generously skills as a means for manipulation. Okay. and they do, people do that, where they get really good at being able to pay attention, get really good at being able to understand, get back and check understanding. They get really good at being able to appreciate your perspective and get into your perspective as close as they can to you say, like, I got it. And wow, you actually hear how I see it. Wow.
But that's still not
that's
generous.
if you're working with well, it may not be, because if you're working with a hostage taker, somebody who's taken hostages, that's how you get to be successful in negotiating with them, is to get to there. But you may not be actually there with any willingness to be influenced.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and there are times when the right move is to want to manipulate someone for the best of the situation.
Right.
Okay. But that isn't exactly what we're talking about when we say to listen generously, because there then is the willingness to be influenced.
I like that phraseology of the willingness to be influenced. I think that's really clear as a way of orienting to that conversation.
Yes. And it's not that you necessarily will, though I do find that most of the time I am, at least in some regard, okay? Like, I'm influenced in that I can more fully appreciate the other person's view, and that I can see how I need to speak to make this change effort occur, or what I need to address, that there's an honest concern there that I haven't appreciated before. I might not decide to change the change process, but I'm greatly influenced in how we're going to go about it and what we're going to do. And I can't get there without that willingness to be, if I'm tight down, like nothing you can say is going to change anything about how I see things, then,
why are we even having the conversation at that point?
Yes, you're right.
And you do see a lot of that taking place.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. Very
Something
much
else
so.
that I remember, again, I'm walking down memory lane a little bit here, but I'm calling out things that I think have been significantly that have influenced me in a significant way in how I communicate personally and the things that we teach in our fundamentals. And I remember you talking about once, and this was very significant for me, this distinction between an event and the interpretation of the event, and the separation of those two ideas, and why that's so important. Could you share a little bit about that, if you remember what I'm referring to? If not, I'll elaborate more.
I can get what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, there's always that. And something happens, okay? And then we have an interpretation. We view it with all of our background, everything that's happened. And then we come up with our story about it, our view of it, okay? And it's important to do that, because that's the only way you're going to deal with it. Otherwise, you're just, okay, that's what's so. Okay, no play. To engage, we have an interpretation. If we can appreciate that that's an interpretation, it's not, there are facts there, but the facts don't move anything. The gauge says that's the fact. The car is at a quarter of a tank. Okay. Now, how do I interpret that? And how do I engage with that fact? That's what's going to shape my behaviors. Okay. And when I realize that's my interpretation, somebody like my interpretation, I got plenty of gas to get to the airport. I just need to fill up on the way back. Somebody else, no, that's way too risky. You gotta, those are different interpretations. Okay, now if I want to treat them as interpretations, not as facts, okay, then we got a lot more room to work together.
Yes.
But when my interpretation is the interpretation, that's where then the collaboration begins to fall away. And mutuality falls away.
Yes.
And okay, I got it. You got the corner of the truth on the planet, and all right.
And I think that's a really, no pun intended, but I think that's a really fundamental shift in thinking. that if we see a situation as this is the truth of it, as opposed to this is my belief about it, my interpretation of it, my way of looking at it. But if this is the truth, then we don't have a lot of options about how we can deal with this, because that is the truth. And there's no point us even talking about it much, because you're not going to be influenced by anything. If we can recognize it as this is my version of the situation, it just even saying that implies there could be other versions. And to use your word again, curious, I might be curious to know, well, tell me more about your version, because there might be something I can learn from that version.
And can we mutually look together for a more forwarding way to interpret what's occurring that would allow us to fulfill on what we're here to accomplish? So we're not just stuck with the one we got for free initially automatically. You get one of those for free. Okay, you don't even have to try. And then, but now can we look together? I got mine, you got yours, we all got ours. They're may be close together or far apart. Now can we look together to see what's a forwarding way that it has to line up with the facts, okay? It has to have a fit with reality. But there's almost always a multitude of ways we can interpret situations. And what's going to make a huge impact in our effectiveness is the way we interpret them. Can we work to find an interpretation that is forwarding, that's going to allow us to move down the field, rather than one that locks us up and paralyzes us, okay? Or one that leads us towards unintended negative consequences, you know? So it gives us a lot more flexibility to accomplish what we want to accomplish, and gives us a lot more room to work together and come to a more aligned perspective on how to work together.
I think of that, and I remember you talking about this many years ago. It puts us in a more, I'm going to use the word powerful position, and I don't mean powerful in a, I'm going to command over you, but defining power as greater flexibility. If I have more options for the way in which I could respond to this situation, that's a better thing than if I have only one way I could look at it, because this is the truth. So the more options I have, the more flexibility I have, the greater the possibilities that we can come up with, to use your words, an interpretation that would be more forwarding to what we're up to.
Right.
So when you practice, for our audience sake, we've got these collaborative way practices. When that gets introduced into a company, so people learn those practices, how do they continue to work at it? Like, what's the mechanism, or is there a mechanism for, okay, I'm a company, I just learned the collaborative way, we now have these tools. Now what? How do I practice that stuff? How do I get better at it? What's the normal way that companies work at it?
Well, like you were saying earlier, usually today the leadership team would go through a 3-day program that really takes a deep dive into what the collaborative way is, and to have some start to more fully embody the practices. And then often, depending upon the size of the company, you might have another group go through, and sometimes as many as 16 or something like that go through the 3-day, depending upon the size. And then you move to doing orientation programs. That's what you were talking about, where you will have people from your company leading this 2-day program, 16-hour thing that trains the rest of the people in the company and all new employees in the practice. So then you have that foundation that you're working on. Then you can look at things that to reinforce the practice, just like you do with my understanding of what you do with, and you probably do a little more deliberately than we do, but nonetheless, there's all kinds of ways. One of the key things, though, is to incorporate it then in all your other training programs. So whenever you're bringing a new a skill in, or a new software program, a new methodology of collaborating on things. Whatever you are bringing in, then get the collaborative way conversation inside of that, so people make the connection, so that then when you're training them to use this new production procedure, you're also training them in collaborative way again, because you're embedding it in those other training programs, and then it starts to be the real places where you have leaders that are and champions for the collaborative way within your environment, that are supporting each other, supporting other people in the practice, and it starts getting self-reinforcing. So it becomes the way that we are working together, and people support each other in that, because it takes place, we call a context of learning, where not only are we learning, we're open to being supported in our learning. And when that happens, then it gets more and more self-supportive. And so that I think is the answer to your question. And there's no fixed answer. It's forever questioned. That's a good question to keep alive forevermore.
So when companies, when we talk to people about culture, because the fundamentals are a way of building the culture in an organization, one of the questions that I get all the time is, people want to know, what's the ROI on this? Because they want to try to attach some dollars to it. And I typically resist the temptation to do that, because I don't know that you really can and that doesn't mean there isn't dramatic ROI. It's just that it's really hard to isolate the variables and say, well, everything else stayed the same, and this is the only thing that changed, and this must be the reason that we doubled our revenue or whatever. How do you think about that? I'm sure you get that question as well. So we're going to spend a lot of time, effort, money putting our people through this collaborative way training. What's the ROI on this? How do I know this was worth it? How do you typically respond to that question?
Similar to you, it's going to be, but I would say there's a number of ways you can look. One is the bottom line is whatever the bottom line is of the company is. And if it's not, it's going to support the bottom line of the company, the growth of the company, the metrics you're using. And there are some places to also look, like in employee retention, for example. That's an area that often you're going to see where you're keeping the people you really want in the organization. I've had like I mentioned earlier, we'll do these leadership intensive, and to get into one, you have to go through a interview process and a whole bunch of things. So, and through the years, I've had a chance to participate in some of those. And it's a really interesting thing to hear people in a collaborative way company talking about their recognition of the fact that they don't see where else in their industry they can work in an environment like this. And even though headhunters will come and ask them, and they could make more money elsewhere, they value the environment in which they're working and where they can make that kind of a contribution. And I had a chance recently where I was with a company that was been practicing for 10 years, and they were having a yearly event for a good hunk of the company. And I got to talk with them and engage with them. And I was just blown away again by that coming from them, how appreciative they were of this environment that they were working in, and how it was how much they valued it. And so it's going to be a company that's where, if you're really practicing, you're up to something. So it's not like we're just all being, it's not
just about being nice.
Nice. It's nice. It's not nice, because it's a rigorous way of relating with one another. Okay. And yet it has so much respect in it, so much, it's that treating with people with dignity and respect in a big way. And to be treated like that and have the opportunity to engage with each other in that way and really feel appreciated and appreciate others. To work in an environment like that is is people value that.
Mm-hmm.
People really value that.
Yeah.
And they'll give more of their heart to what that is. They want to be a part of it. Yes, economics but we've seen in companies where that economic had taken them somewhere else, but they come back. They go, whoa, this is where I want to work. I do not want to work in an environment where there's such a lack for dignity to respect, where collaboration isn't the way we're working together, where people are being so dominated by other people, and there's getting heard is so difficult, and where it's so hard to contribute, and you don't feel appreciated. The people are not called to give their best in those kind of environments, and they silently go on vacation while getting a paycheck in those kind of environments. Yes. And I think today more and more of the workforce is less and less willing to give in those environments.
Yeah.
Back when we were youngsters, it was we were more willing to do that. I don't see that being the case.
No.
So it's moving away from that. So
I suspect,
hopefully that answers your question somewhat.
I suspect you've seen. I can't imagine you don't see this. We hear it with the fundamentals all the time. People will talk about how being in an environment which they're practicing their fundamentals has changed their personal lives. It's pretty hard to be a generous listener or to speak straight at work and not have that, leak into, in a positive kind of way, the relationships and the way that you relate to people at home. And I imagine you hear a lot of that as well.
We hear that all the time. And way back in the beginning days, it would be, I remember the CEO, one of the companies we were working with, came and Lloyd, the spouses of the people in this company are thanking me for putting their spouse through this program. Life is better, and I hear it too, and I hear it moving over. I was again at this same gathering last December, and I was talking to a wife of one of the people that work there, and she was sharing with me how they practice it in their whole family, and how her daughters will say, "Hey, Mom, I don't think you're actually listening generously to me," and then they will practice listening, and or different things like that. So it's a beautiful thing. That's one of the nice things about the collaborative way, and I believe that to be true about what you're doing also, is that work becomes a place where you become more skillful, you develop as a leader, as a person, not just in the work environment, but that carries over into your home and your community, to your church, to your or other organizations that you're part of. And I've seen that happen and been told those stories over and over and over again, as you have. Yes.
That doesn't surprise me at all. So as we wrap up our time together, Lloyd, I know you've got two books, the original Collaborative Way, the story, that was a fictional story, right, about engaging the mind and spirit. And then you have your book about overcoming the 7 most common pitfalls.
Leading the Collaborative Way, overcoming the 7 most, Yes.
Great. And so those are available, I'm assuming, on Amazon and
yes, those are on Amazon.
What's the website for Collaborative Way as people want it? We'll make sure it's on the show notes as well.
Yes, collaborativeway.com.
Okay, great.
Pretty simple, collaborativeway.com.
That's pretty simple. So it's been great to reconnect on this and to see the roots of the Collaborative Way and how they've influenced the fundamentals and their powerful ways of helping people to work in ways that are way more effective, to collaborate more. I love your distinction, too, that you made of not just communication, but how we're relating to each other. I think that's a subtle but important distinction as well. So thank you so much for the influence you've had in my life and my career, as well as for being part of the Culture Architects podcast, Lloyd.
Well, David, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I appreciate our time together. Appreciate your generosity in this conversation, and And thank you for the work you're doing in the world to bring this designed way of relating and working together into a reality and into practice in so many companies. So
it's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that wraps up today's episode of Culture Architects. If you're enjoying these conversations, subscribe on your favorite platform and also consider leaving a quick review, and that way other culture-minded leaders can find the show. And for more tools on building a high-performing culture in your organization, visit CultureWise.com. See you next time on Culture Architects.
This has been Culture Architects with David J. Friedman. Join us next time for more insights and wisdom from great leaders in all walks of life. To book David for your next event or to learn more about his writing, speaking, or consulting, go to davidjfriedman.com. Culture Architects with David J. Friedman is a production of CultureWise.